Well, thank you, and good morning, or at least if I were at home right now, good night. It's been an adjustment, it always is. I was actually here just this last summer. I have a sister-in-law that lives about 30 minutes from here in High Wycombe, so I was able to spend a couple of lovely weeks here this last summer. So this is actually my second time in the last 6 months that I've been here, so I feel fortunate. A couple of clarifications. My title is actually Pastor for Web Ministries. And the reason I clarify that is that there is also a pastor for media at the Forest Lake Church. We have both, a pastor for media and a pastor for web ministries. It's often hard to tell what the difference is. The line is sort of blurry between the two positions. But if this were to be archived, which I believe it is, and were my associate to see the introduction, she would be upset that I was called the pastor for media. No, only because it's obviously a discussion point that we have many times. We're okay with it, but anyway. And what I would like to speak about this morning is the connected congregation, the ways in which congregations can use technology to connect with each other and the world around them. And this is a journey that we've been on at Forest Lake for a number of years now. The graphic that I found interesting was actually I saw this at the hotel in Dubai last year for the GAiN conference, but I'm sure it's corporate advertising. Holiday Inn uses it probably a number of different places. It's not unique to Dubai. But anyway, the concept in the picture is that, there's this image of this child with a laptop, and the laptop is as large as the child. And I'm not sure what vintage this equipment is. The geek in me wonders. For one thing, the VGA port is in the middle of the back, and they're typically on the side these days. And also, the concept is that by having this huge piece of equipment, relatively speaking, in your lap, you are able to stay connected. But as human beings, if we were to be at this location, in this place, with this child on a bed in a hotel room with a laptop, would we be connected to that child? Or are they behind a screen, out of sight, and connecting to perhaps a whole nother world? If we were in the room with that child and wanted to have a conversation with them, we would probably ask them to put the laptop down and close the lid, because we wouldn't be able to connect with them while they're hiding behind this piece of equipment. That, to me, seems to be illustrative of the challenge we face in using technology to connect with others. There's an element of it where it is a matter of being behind a screen, being connected or perhaps even almost overwhelmed by a piece of equipment. And yet at the same time, we're saying connect to one another. If we were in the room together right now, as we are, and all of you had your laptop up, now many of you have tablets, it's a little bit different experience, but if you all had laptops up, as I often experience as an instructor, it's hard for me to lecture, to speak, or to have a conversation, because everyone is behind a screen. Everyone is out of visual contact with each other. And that, to me, is really the paradigm that I think we have, and the challenge that perhaps we have as we look at the idea of being a connected congregation using technology. How do we move from that screen experience to that personal experience? So that's part of what I want to look at today. Here's some of the topics I want to explore. One, utilizing current tools and technologies. This will be outdated. In fact, I was going through my notes from last year when I mentioned I went through this presentation, and I already found things that were outdated from a year ago. So, 6 months from now, this will be outdated. That's always the fun of technology. But I want to talk about utilizing tools and techniques to enhance community and communication, and then also to look at the idea of embracing existing tools and incorporating them into worship and into church life. Again, as I've mentioned, this has been kind of a journey for us at Forest Lake. Let me just hit on a couple of community tools. First of all, the one that everyone talks about, unless you're Billy, which is Facebook. And that is, whether you like it or not, it has become a common ground for many individuals, many places, many organizations, many groups. It is by no means the only social media tool out there. But churches and Facebook is kind of an interesting thing to watch. It sort of seems to be going through the process of the same kind of discussion that we had at one time about websites. Should I have a website or not? So forth. And we laugh at that now, perhaps, but there was a serious discussion at one time. Should I have a website, or a web page, as it started out being? It's just a static bit of code, and then they became sites as opposed to pages. And now we seem to be having the same discussion many times about whether I should be on Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or whatever it is that is a social media type tool. But like it or not, it has become a common meeting place and a common ground, and many things connect together to it. However, I would argue that it requires intentionality to make it work. Thanks to Billy's recommendation, last night I watched a video from the One Project that was held here last year, a presentation by, I want to say, Lawrence Turner. And it was a really fascinating discussion that he was setting up, and in part he was talking about his own experience with Facebook, and how once he had been persuaded by his students to get onto Facebook, he discovered it was a way of collecting friends. He said, like collecting stamps. In other words, there it is, there's a friend. And he collected friends on Facebook. And at some point in time, I don't know what the number was, he had a large number of friends on Facebook. Now, he never actually interacted with them, but he collected them. So, certain, just like likes or followers or whatever, he had a certain number of friends. So that perhaps is one way of using Facebook, but it's not really perhaps what it is designed for or meant to be used for. So it requires intentionality. Also, the same is held true with streaming. That seems to be the discussion that we're having now as churches. Do I stream or not? And how do I go about doing that? How do I stream my services? One of the interesting dynamics to streaming is that many of the streaming tools that are available now include the functionality of chat. You can have dialogue during the stream. Where this discussion becomes interesting is it okay for people to chat during a stream of a church service? Think about that in the physical world versus the online world. If churches encouraged everyone in the congregation to talk to each other during the sermon, what would that experience be like? Wouldn't there be somebody, stereotypically the little old lady, who would turn around and shush you, tell you to be quiet? We're having church. For many cultures and many contexts, the idea of reverence is silence, correct? In a worship service that is noisy, oftentimes it's perceived to be irreverent. So is it irreverent to chat during an online streaming service? It's a question that we've had, and it's a question we've discussed. And our conclusion at this point is, yes, it perhaps is like talking during church, but not really. That's kind of where we've landed. We're not really sure exactly what to make of it. Some people are comfortable with chatting during a stream. Others find it distracting. Fortunately, many of the streaming services allow you to minimize that or not participate. Anyway, so that's some of the communication or community tools. Communication tools. One of the things that we've been using are web-based newsletters. Constant Contact is one of the services that we use. There are a number of them. MailChimp is another one, for example. Many different services that allow you to create an online newsletter, a web-based newsletter, and then disseminate it to others. Vimeo or other video storage, YouTube, of course, is another competitor in that realm, to share short video content. Many times there are things that are of value, events, stories, people, celebrations that are worth capturing and storing and then sharing. For example, one of the things that we found really helpful in a church of our size, we're just under 4,000 members at Forest Lake. Baptisms are something that is, an important event. It's difficult to do in a time-constrained manner. Everybody wants to speak at length. Pastors are known for that ability. And of course, there's important stories to tell, people's experiences in coming to Christ, and why it is and who they want to thank and what they want to acknowledge, and sharing a Bible text and different things like that. And it's hard to accomplish that. We have 3 services, and 8:40, 10, and 11:30. There's only so much time in there. And if you have someone who feels the desire to share their life story during a baptism, or a pastor who's gotten the rare opportunity to preach during that baptism, so now they're going to go for it. And yet you've said, I only have 3 minutes for this baptism. How do I accomplish that? Well, one of the things that we've come up with is videotaping the baptismal testimony ahead of time. That way, an editor like myself can boil it down to 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes of content, and then the pastor who's doing the baptizing just simply baptizes them. It's a novel concept, but for some it is anyway. And so what we do is we show that video, so the person in the tank is not having to speak, extemporaneously on the spot and trying to remember everything and so forth. We've recorded it ahead of time, and then we archive that, and we post it to Vimeo. Another is with our newsletter. We also will often do an interview or a little bit of a back and forth between myself and the editor of the newsletter or other people. And we'll record that, and then we'll send that out with the newsletter, and then we'll also archive it. So other sort of short video content storage, and then as I mentioned before, Facebook. Now, the thing to me about Facebook that becomes valuable and is different than some other social media platforms is that it allows you to create groups or events or things around particular topics or ministries or whatever it might be. For example, there's a Facebook group for this event. Now, it can still serve a purpose going down the road. It could be repurposed for the next time that GAiN Europe occurs, if there is one, but maybe not. Maybe there'll be a different one next time, or perhaps it'll only happen once, so there you go. It's been created and it moves on. But it serves as a communication tool, a way to bring a group of people together or around an event or around a particular situation. For example, we're right next door to Forest Lake Academy. And there's a young man there who's a freshman, a first-year student in high school at the academy, who has somehow come down with a brain tumor condition and is really going through some significant health challenges. A face group page was created around this young person. It's called Pray for Caleb. Twitter handle, hashtag was created along the same way, and so forth. And now it has become a way for people to gather around this young man, hear reports about how he's doing, give him messages of support, etc. But that's a very specific situation and a very specific need. And as long as he is facing that health challenge, that group will remain relevant. But should his circumstances change, that group will then become sort of an archive, sort of a collection of what was going on at that time, and will eventually become less relevant. So it does serve as a communication tool, although it may not last. A third area that I've been finding intriguing with technology and in a connected congregation is worship tools. There's a presentation in the schedule about ProPresenter and other software, particularly ProPresenter. Let me just put this in, and that is not without stealing thunder from someone else who's going to be the expert on this. Whatever you do in worship, please kill PowerPoint. All right? Keynote, same thing. Drive a stake through its heart. It is not meant for worship. PowerPoint is not for worship. It has a limited value as a sort of a advertising base. You can put little slides up, and those can run, between services or before the service starts, or some sort of a function like that. I noticed, like on the monitors around the campus here, there's a running PowerPoint keynote, whatever that is. That is not for worship. That is simply for a business presentation. Think of it as a slide projector. Some of you are old enough to remember what those were. You took individual bits of film, that's what it really was, and you put them in a carousel tray, and then you hit next, next, next. Now, if you wanted to make a change, you stopped the presentation, you turned on the lights often, and you took the tray out, and you had to manipulate the slides, and if you took one out, then you had to move things, or you wanted to add one, then you had to move everything forward. It was a really complicated process. And if you missed a spot, then the next slide was just a white screen. That's PowerPoint. That's what it's meant to be. It is the slideshow of the 80s. We're in the 21st century now. ProPresenter, Media Shout, another competitor, are built for worship. It allows you to be fluid and dynamic in your presentation. And so you go to the presentation. I'm not going to steal somebody's thunder. But anyway, also has Scripture integrated into the software. When I first arrived at Forest Lake, they were using PowerPoint. And I was shocked. But anyway, horrified, in fact. There was one gentleman, a volunteer, retired individual, who was spending 3 to 4 hours per week making a PowerPoint presentation for each church service because the pastor wanted to have the scriptures up on the screen while he was preaching. Great, very commendable. There is no way to make a PowerPoint slide to put on the screen unless you type in or copy and paste the content. You have to adjust where it ends on that screen and then continues on to the next screen. Then if the pastor changes his verse, changes the translation, wants to add another translation, whatever it is, more work, more effort, so forth and so on. I heard about this, watched him one day, spending hours doing this, and I said, here, let me show you something. I sat him down in front of my laptop with ProPresenter, and I said, give me a passage. I said, Deuteronomy 4:13-20. I said, fine, what translation? NIV, boom, done. Okay, next. And he was like, hold it. Okay, gave me another one, different translation. I hit it, entered it in, hit enter, boom, it was done. He said, you just returned 5 hours to my life. And he was a bit upset at first, but he got over it very quickly. So another piece of software that I found, a platform that I found very helpful in a church worship context is something called YouVersion. YouVersion is a Bible app to begin with, but it also has other functions to it. One in particular is called YouVersion Live, which is one of the elements of YouVersion that allows you to customize your particular worship service, and particularly in terms of the Bible verses, the texts that are being used, as well as the outline of the service, into a web-based process that then, during the service, individuals in your congregation can access that, see where the flow of the service is, can respond to various, they can take notes, they can respond to the process, they can give online while they're in church, whatever it is that you want to incorporate into that. There's a lot of functionality there in YouVersion. So we use that quite extensively. We're in between volunteers that develop that right now, but we've used it quite a bit in the past and found it really useful. And then there is church life itself, just sorts of tools that are of value in the church life, the life of a congregation. One is event programs that allow you to, or software web-based applications that allow you to schedule, allow you to create events, invite people to events, schedule, coordinate, give directions, all those kinds of things. One of them is called Eventbrite. Another one that I use quite a bit is called Wufoo. I love the names of the software these days. Wufoo, W-U-F-O-O. Wufoo is a form content creator. It allows you to create really nice forms, very simple to use, very straightforward, and then you can embed that form, that code, into your website, and it will then capture that information back, and you can forward it on to people via email. Also, what's great about it is it integrates into social media. Many of the different programs for events do that. And also, they can then embed into websites, which I find particularly helpful. And finally, many ministry leaders, Pathfinders, for example, is a prime example, love the fact that they can respond directly and pay online. So they'll often have some sort of a pay functionality built into them, or the ability to capture payments and do financial transactions as part of the software itself. Now, one of the things that has been helpful for us as well is to not just create websites, but create websites around special events or particular feature-focused sorts of things. For example, we have something at Forest Lake now each spring that we have a new pastor. We recently changed pastors. Derek Morris, somebody may have heard of him. He was, I believe, an attendant here, if not an alumni. And Derek was our pastor for about 6 years. He recently moved on to the General Conference where he's at now, and we inherited, well, we didn't inherit, we were privileged to receive Jeff Patterson as our senior pastor. And Jeff's, one of his emphasis is to have a spring sermon series that is what we call an interactive sermon series. And what an interactive sermon series is, where we have a series of presentations, a series of sermons around a particular topic, and then a series of study guides to go along with that sermon series, and then small groups convene during the week to discuss the topic for the next Sabbath. Not the previous one, but the next one. So when they arrive on Sabbath, they've already been processing in their mind the topic, the content, the focus of that particular coming week. And then they're in a particular place to see, okay, we've talked about it this way, and then we hear the pastor talking about it perhaps in the same way, perhaps in a different way. And then when they go back the next week, they kind of debrief that and then start moving forward to the next week after that. We've done 3 now. We're about ready to launch our 3rd one in 2 weeks, as soon as I get back. The first one was called The Sins of Jesus. Kind of interesting topic. The Questions of Jesus was our second one, and this 3rd one, we couldn't figure out how to get an of Jesus in there, so it's just simply called Taking Risks. And that site hasn't gone live yet. But what we do is I create a site around the artwork, around the branding for the particular sermon series, and then we also then put the study guides. We have study guides for adults as well as families and then children. So we have different study guides there. And then also as the series goes on, we start collecting pictures of the groups and directions to people's small group gatherings and so forth. And so it kind of builds content around a particular event. And then once the event is over, it kind of serves as an archive for what went on during that event. Pictures again of the group, the content of the sermon, the study guides, and of course the study guides are still of value even after the sermon series is over. So it becomes a function of church life. So it is a website, but it's different in the sense that it becomes kind of an active thing for a while and eventually becomes static. So a little bit about just the process of getting there in terms of content and tools. First of all, I would encourage you to continually evaluate, continually look at different ideas, different platforms, different software, different websites, different tools. Constantly evaluate. Don't just accept them blindly, but evaluate what there is out there, what's available. Not every tool is going to be exactly what you need. Fortunately, many of them often are available as a demo or as a trial version or something like that. You're able to go and use a website for a few weeks or a few days or whatever it might be. So you can try it out. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's only one part of it that is of value to you, but try it and see. Launch it. Don't just sort of put it together and say, okay, here we go, but actually launch it. Build interest in it. Talk about it ahead of time, and then launch it. Say, hey, we're starting this today. Launch it out there, train about it, and then promote it. People have to hear over and over about something before they finally start using it and adopting it. Don't just build it and hope that it will get used. There was a film that was popular a number of years ago now in the United States where it had the line, if we build it, they will come. It's a movie called Field of Dreams. And I'm not really sure how that works in the internet world today, the web world today. You can build anything you want. Doesn't mean they'll come. You have to promote it. You have to emphasize it. You have to keep repeating about the fact that this is available. You have to show value in what it is and why it is important. That often involves more than just one individual, a couple of geeks who are excited about something or whatever it is. You actually have to incorporate the pastoral staff, the leadership, the whoever it is that's in your congregation that's going to be able to talk about it. And then use it in a meaningful way. I know there's a lot of really cool stuff out there, but just because it's cool doesn't mean it's really helpful. It just means you like it and you're going to spend a lot of time playing with it. But it doesn't necessarily serve to be valuable unless you're using it in a meaningful way. So draw on the value and then continue to use it, continue to push it. And that's not an easy thing to do because after a while the excitement wears off and the coolness wears off. And so you sometimes find yourself having to push to make it continue. Let me give you an example of some of these ideas and some of the processes that we've had to go through. And this has been sort of the discussion about the use of technology as well as what kind of technology is out there. One thing that I've often had to answer questions about and been a part of discussions about is about whether we should have Wi-Fi service in our church or not. When I first arrived at Forest Lake a number of years ago now, it's been about 8 years ago, I've been on staff there about 5. I was first there as a volunteer. The IT, which is the world I came from, structure of the church was really haphazard. Someone would plug in a Wi-Fi hotspot somewhere, a Wi-Fi router someplace, give it a name or not, or maybe it would just simply be called Bridge, which is really helpful, and then it would just be stuck somewhere on a shelf, up in the rafters, someplace, left on a table, whatever it might be. And then if you wanted to use the Wi-Fi, you had to know what the name was, and you had to understand what it meant. And then, of course, you had to have in your device 5 or 6 or 7 names, depending on where you were on the church campus, because they were all different devices in various and sundry haphazard places. The challenge was that the church only had a DSL line, which is about 1.5 megs up. For those of you who know what that means, that's not much. That connection was used by everything in the church. The office staff, the streaming service, the Wi-Fi for the church, everything. Oh, the phone system, too. It was an integrated DSL circuit. So it also included the phone system. The phone system was given an automatic 500K right off the top, which meant now you were down to about a meg of connectivity. Then the streaming was set to be somewhere in the 300 to 400K area. So now you're down to half, 1/3 of what you started off with. And then everybody wanted to use Wi-Fi. It was interesting. You could literally take our stream down on Sabbath by showing up at church with a laptop and logging into our network. That's all it took. One person. And so you would see 3 or 4, and you'd be like, oh no, we're going to lose our Wi-Fi. Sure enough. And it would. We would just grind to a halt. Our stream would grind to a halt. So we had this whole discussion about Wi-Fi. Is it a valuable technology? What's it going to do for us? Should we have it? Well, the first part of that discussion was, you know what? We can't be on Wi-Fi on Sabbath. So we literally had deacons trained to go around and tell people to turn off their devices. Don't use your laptop. Turn that tablet off, please. In those days, it was mostly just laptops and some smartphones. But then, smartphones started arriving, and the young people were often many of the ones to first really start using it. And so it became a youth problem. The kids are the problem. So we just need to find the kids and tell them to stop using Wi-Fi. And for adults, that's often a solution because, the kids are the problem and youth are a problem anyway. So there you go. We just need to shut the kids down. And that didn't work too well, but, it didn't make for good public relations, let's say. However, I noticed this I'd say about 3 years ago now. I was running the camera from up in the balcony. We have a couple of cameras, manned cameras in our balcony. And I was running one of the cameras one Sabbath, and it was in January, right after Christmas. And I could see across the congregation. You know what I noticed happening in the congregation? Tablets. Tablets were showing up. iPads, Androids, so forth. And I started seeing these tablet screens lighting up. And I was like, uh-oh. Now we've got real problems. Because those weren't kids that were using those. Those were grandparents. Now, if you know anything about church dynamics, it's a different story about shutting down the young people versus shutting down the old people. Okay? Young people have no money. Old people do. Young people don't give financially to the church. Old people do. And the older people had gotten these tablets for Christmas. Their grandkids had given them to them. Their kids had given them to them. They didn't really know how to use them. And because the parents didn't, or the kids didn't want to spend a lot of money on grandma's tablet, they gave them one that was Wi-Fi only. Didn't have a data plan. So they're sitting there going, I hear we can use this. So they open it up, and there it is. Now our Wi-Fi is crashing. But now it's not crashing because the young people are using it. It's crashing because the grandparents are using it. Now let's see the deacons shut them down. So, we had this whole discussion about we're encouraging the use of the internet, we're encouraging the use with these different tools of things like YouVersion and so forth, and all of these people are showing up with iPad, Android-based devices, tablet devices. Now what do we do? One of the first things that I did, was started scheduling classes on the use of mobile devices. Many of the older people in our church didn't know how to use these gifts, but they looked great and they looked cool, and they wanted to, their grandkids said they would be great to use, so they wanted to use them. And so I started holding classes for mobile device usage. May seem intuitive to you, but for many of them it wasn't. And a big important part of that was online security. we started having classes about online security because, again, they're not that familiar often with how they operate or with the risks involved in identity theft and so forth. Then, as I mentioned before, our Wi-Fi began to become overwhelmed. Our streaming was grinding to a halt. However, the difference was it was grinding to a halt, as I mentioned, not because the kids were using the internet, but because the older people were. The difference, as I mentioned already, is the older people have money. And so when they would come to me to complain about the fact that the streaming was ending or they couldn't get on the Wi-Fi, my answer was, well, for the right amount of money, we could change that. And we did. And they started giving to that. And we accumulated enough to rewire the entire physical plant, rewired the entire campus to Category 6 Ethernet, gigabit to the desk, all those good techie terms. And I put in an integrated Wi-Fi system that is separate from our stream. And also dedicated a certain amount of bandwidth to the stream itself and updated our DSL line when it went away. And now we're in a fiber optic connection. It's fiber to the street. And we're in a much higher capacity situation. The wonderful thing about that is, I'm happy to tell you, we've exceeded our bandwidth again. However, in the 3 years of contract since our initial 10 meg asynchronous circuit, which is 10 up, 10 down, the price for a 25 megabyte circuit is the same as our 10. So now we're going to 25. As soon as I get back, we'll finish that contract. So it continues on. But see, I see that as a success. I don't see that as a failure. I see that as a success. So we looked at the problem. We evaluated it. We looked at ways of resolving it. We then had a problem, but had people motivated to give to solving that problem. And I think that's a key thing when it comes to technology in church life. You can't just throw stuff out there and say, isn't it cool, isn't it great? You need to be able to show why it is good, why it is great. And then when it becomes a problem because people don't have access to it or because they aren't able to utilize it, then you can say, you know what, if we had the money, we could change that. Many times you will. So, the bottom line is this to me. Use technology to enhance connections and to build community. The internet can be used to deliver content. Initially, that's pretty much what it was. It was individual campuses, university campuses, first talking to each other, different defense department sorts of things. Eventually, it grew to static information, grew to communities building around what used to be called things like bulletin boards and so forth. Ray mentioned CompuServe the other night. Yes, I was on there too. And the model was a one-to-many. I put up content and many people can access it. That was the initial model. But the internet can also be used to create connectivity and enhance community. And it can ultimately be a one-to-one model. I put up something or I'm able to connect directly with someone else. And that is where it has evolved to these days. It's become a place where people can connect one-to-one. Even corporations and brands and large groups and entities can actually have a one-to-one conversation. I'm not really sure who you're always talking to on the other end of Twitter or whatever it is, but somebody is there actually communicating back with you. And I would challenge churches to think about that as well. It isn't just putting content out there and hoping that many people will see it or access it or listen to it or learn from it or whatever it is. But perhaps it's a way to initiate ultimately that one-to-one conversation where the child, like we saw in the picture at the beginning, closes the lid on the laptop and is sitting there in your congregation and is a part of your community of people and actually engages in a direct face-to-face conversation. That's called community. It's also called sharing the gospel. Thank you.